My name is Valentina Cruz. I am 34 years old, and I used to believe that when someone dies, the shape of them is fixed forever. You know who they were. You carry it. I was wrong. My brother Mateo died on a Tuesday in February. 3 years and 2 months before the afternoon, a little boy grabbed my hand in a grocery store and told me he had been waiting his whole life to meet me. Mateo was 31 when he died. He had our mother's eyes and our father's stubborn jaw and a laugh that came out of nowhere and filled whatever room he was standing in. He was the person I called first when anything happened, good or bad, it didn't matter. I called Mateo. When I got into the graduate program at 31, I called Mateo before I called our parents. When my car slid into a ditch on I-90 in a winter storm, I called Mateo before I called anyone else. He answered every time. He was killed in a car accident 2 miles from the apartment he had been renting in Portland. The other driver ran a red light. Mateo died before the ambulance arrived. I found out by phone call from our father, who delivered the news in 3 sentences and then said we would need to discuss the estate, and I stood in my kitchen with the receiver pressed against my ear and couldn't speak. I thought that was grief. Some of it was. But some of it was something else, something that did not have a name for me until a small boy reached up and took my hand between 2 rows of cereal boxes and said 4 words that rearranged everything I thought I knew. I want to pause here for a second because I know some of you are watching this and thinking about your own family, the people you lost before you really knew them, or the things that came to light after someone was gone. If that's you, stay with me. This story gets harder before it gets anything else. But it also gets somewhere I did not expect. The grocery store where it happened was a Safeway on Northeast Fremont, 3 blocks from the apartment I moved into after Mateo died. I chose that neighborhood partly because he had lived nearby, which I understood was not rational but did not care about. It was late October, 11 in the morning on a Wednesday, and I was standing in the cereal aisle deciding between 2 boxes I did not particularly want either of when I felt a small hand close around 3 of my fingers. I looked down. There was a boy standing beside me. He was about 4 years old, maybe just past it, that age when children are still round in the face but starting to get long in the legs. He had dark hair that curled a little at the ends and very dark eyes, and he was wearing a blue zip-up sweatshirt with a dinosaur on the chest. He was looking up at me with an expression that was not afraid and not uncertain. He looked, if anything, like he had accomplished something. "Aunt Lena," he said. "Daddy said you'd find me one day." My throat closed around whatever I was about to say. I looked around the aisle. There was no one else near us. A woman at the far end with her back turned, selecting something from the bottom shelf. A store employee pushing a flatbed cart around the corner. No one watching me with this child. No one who seemed to belong to him. "Sweetheart," I said. My voice came out carefully, the way you speak when you are trying not to startle something. "What's your name?" "Emilio," he said. I squared the packages in my hands and set them both back on the shelf before I answered him. I needed to do something with my hands. "Emilio," I said. "Who brought you here today?" "My abuela," he said. "She's in the other aisle. She said to stay, but I saw you." He was still holding my hand. He had not let go. "How did you know my name?" I asked. He reached into the front pocket of his sweatshirt with his free hand and produced a photograph. It was laminated. Someone had taken it to one of those self-service kiosks and run it through a laminator, the kind with rounded edges and a slightly uneven seal along one side. He held it out to me. I took it. My hand was steadier than I expected. It was a photograph of my brother. Mateo was maybe 27 or 28 in the picture, standing in front of what looked like a park. Trees behind him, a low wooden fence, afternoon light. He was laughing, the full laugh, the one that came out of nowhere. Beside him, her shoulder touching his, was a woman I did not recognize. Young, dark-haired, her face turned slightly toward him. And in his arms, very small, was a baby. The crease on the photograph ran diagonally across the lower left corner. Someone had carried it a long time. I do not know how long I stood there. Long enough that the woman at the end of the aisle finished her selection and moved on. Long enough that I became aware of the cold coming off the refrigerator cases behind me, the smell of the store, the sound of a PA announcement somewhere overhead. When I looked up, Emilio was still watching me, still holding 3 of my fingers. "That's my daddy," he said. He told my abuela that one day Aunt Lena would find me. He paused. "He said you had his eyes." I pressed my free hand flat against my sternum just once, then lowered it. "He did have them," I said. "He had your grandmother's eyes." Emilio thought about this. "I have them too," he said with some satisfaction. He did. He absolutely did. I met Emilio's grandmother in the bread aisle 60 seconds later. Her name was Graciela Fuentes, and she was 63 years old and had the careful, measured manner of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times and was not sure, now that it was here, whether she had rehearsed it well enough. She was a small woman, shorter than me by several inches, with white-streaked hair pulled back and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. When she saw me holding Emilio's hand, she stopped walking. Her cart rolled a half-inch forward and then stopped too. "Valentina," she said. Not a question. "Yes," I said. She closed her eyes for one moment. Then she opened them and said, "I thought it might be you. He described you well." The he was Mateo. I understood that without asking. We stood in the bread aisle of a Safeway for a few seconds saying nothing, 2 women who had both loved the same person and had never met, while Emilio let go of my hand and went to stand beside his grandmother and look at both of us with the calm, assessing expression of a child who does not understand the weight of the room but knows something important is happening. Graciela asked if I had time to get coffee. I said yes. I left my cart where it was. We walked 3 blocks to a diner I knew on Fremont and sat in a booth by the window, and Emilio sat beside his grandmother and ate a waffle and colored on the paper placemat with the crayons the server brought, and Graciela folded her hands on the table and told me the parts of my brother's life I had not known. Her daughter was Pilar. Pilar and Mateo had met at a mutual friend's party in Portland when Mateo was 26. They had dated for nearly a year. Pilar had become pregnant. Mateo had been, Graciela chose the word carefully, conflicted. Not about the baby, she said. About what to tell his family. He loved Pilar, she said. That was never in question. But he was afraid of what his father would do. I didn't ask her to clarify. I knew exactly what she meant. He kept saying he would tell them, Graciela said. He kept saying he needed more time. Pilar accepted this longer than she should have. When Emilio was born, Mateo was there. He was a good father in every way that mattered. He came to Portland every month, sometimes more. He paid for everything more than we asked him to. He loved that boy. She stopped. He was supposed to tell his family when Emilio turned 2. That was the plan. Pilar gave him a deadline. And then... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Mateo had died 6 months before Emilio's 2nd birthday. I looked at the laminated photograph on the table between us. I had set it down when we sat, and neither of us had picked it up again. The crease ran diagonally across the lower corner, soft from handling. Pilar had it laminated after he died, Graciela said. So Emilio could carry it without it falling apart. My pulse caught hard once in my chest. Where is Pilar? I asked. Graciela was quiet for a moment. She passed, she said. 14 months ago. A blood clot. She was 29 years old. She looked at her grandson. Emilio has been with me since. I heard the words. I processed them in sequence. And then I understood what I was looking at. A 4-year-old boy who had lost both his parents before he was old enough to hold the loss, being raised by a 63-year-old woman who was doing it alone, who had walked into a grocery store on a Wednesday morning and let her grandson approach a stranger because the stranger was not a stranger at all. Why now? I asked. Why not? After Mateo died, why didn't you contact us? Graciela looked at me steadily. Mateo made me promise not to, she said. While Pilar was alive, we honored it. After Pilar died, I reconsidered. But I did not know anything about your family except what Mateo told me, and what he told me. She paused. It was not encouraging. She did not say my father's name. She did not have to. He was afraid of one person, she said. Only one. I pressed the edge of my thumb against the table's surface and said nothing for a moment. How did you find me? I asked. Today, I mean. In that specific store. I didn't find you, she said, with something that was almost a smile. Emilio did. We've shopped at that Safeway twice a week for 6 months. Mateo told me you moved to Portland after he died. I found that through some mutual people, nothing complicated. He said you had his eyes and a red coat and that you shopped early on weekdays. I told Emilio what to watch for. She looked at her grandson again. He is very serious about things he decides to do. Emilio was coloring a dinosaur yellow and did not look up. I sat with that for a long moment. The image of this woman and this small boy making deliberate, patient trips to a grocery store on Northeast Fremont, twice a week, for 6 months, waiting for a woman in a red coat who had her dead brother's eyes. Mateo told you all that, I said. He told me everything about you, she said. You were his favorite person in the world. I think you should know that. The cold from the window glass came through to my arm where I was resting against the booth. I left it there. I needed something to hold still. I drove home from the diner that afternoon with Graciella's phone number in my phone and Emilio's laminated photograph still in my coat pocket, because she had pressed it into my hands when we left and said it belonged with me now, that she had a copy, that this one had always been meant for me. I did not call my parents that night. I sat in my apartment and looked at the photograph for a long time and tried to rebuild the architecture of my brother's life with this piece now visible, and what I saw when I did, what the whole structure looked like from here, made a very specific kind of sense. Mateo had been afraid of our father. I had known that my entire life without ever saying it that plainly. Our father, Rodrigo Cruz, was not a man who raised his voice or broke things. He was worse than that. He was a man who made decisions about other people's lives and communicated them as established facts, and if you questioned the facts, he looked at you with a patience so deliberate it felt like contempt. He had built the same insurance brokerage in Sacramento over 30 years, genuinely from nothing after his family immigrated when he was 12. I do not diminish that. But somewhere in building it, he had developed a theory about family that was really a theory about hierarchy. There was a correct order to things, and deviation was not merely impractical but a personal offense against him specifically. I understood this at 9 years old when he explained that my interest in drawing was fine as a hobby, but that I should not confuse it with a direction. I understood it at 17 when I won a regional writing competition and he asked why I hadn't entered the math and science fair instead. He said this in front of my grandmother, who had driven 3 hours to congratulate me and did not know where to look. I understood it at 22 when I chose Portland for my undergraduate degree, a choice he interpreted correctly as a statement and never forgave me for, though he never said so directly. Mateo stayed. He worked part-time in the brokerage, stayed in the holding pattern our father preferred for him, and built a separate life in Portland that was his and no one else's. A real one, a quiet one, a life with a woman he loved and a child he was devoted to. He had kept it separate because he had understood correctly that our father would find a way to make it his. He would find a way to make Pilar's pregnancy a deviation from the correct order, to make the baby a negotiating chip or a complication, and Mateo had wanted, for once, for the first time, something that belonged entirely to him. I had not been told. That part landed differently than I expected. Not as a wound at first, just information, flat and verifiable. But I sat with it that evening and found the edge of it. Mateo had hidden his son from everyone, and everyone included me. I chose, by the end of that night, to understand it as fear. Because I knew what our father was capable of doing to things Mateo loved. I had watched him do it to Mateo's plans and friendships and sense of his own judgment, steadily and incrementally, over years, and I had not stopped it because I had left Sacramento at 22 and protected myself, and Mateo had stayed. Over the following weeks, I began meeting Graciella and Emilio regularly. Wednesday mornings, usually. The same diner on Fremont, sometimes a park when the weather held, once the children's section of the library on Burnside where Emilio selected 6 books with the seriousness of someone making significant financial decisions. I learned things in increments. I learned that Mateo had visited Portland every month without fail for 3 years, and that our parents had believed he was attending industry conferences and visiting old college friends. I learned that he had set up a separate savings account, Not large, $22,000 at the time of his death, designated for Emilio, which Pilar had used for the boy's first years and which had run out before Pilar died. I learned that Mateo had told Graciela specific things about me. That I was the only person in his family he trusted without reservation. That if anything ever happened to him, he hoped Graciela would find a way to let me know. That he had not told me about Emilio not because he didn't trust me, but because he was afraid I would feel obligated to tell our parents, or that I would be put in an impossible position between him and our father, and he had not wanted to do that to me. I learned that Emilio called me Aunt Lena because Mateo had taught him to. He had shown Emilio my photograph and said that name and that title, and the boy had held on to it for 4 years the way children hold on to things their parents hand them. Completely, without question. I had contributed to my brother's life in ways I hadn't known to count. I had given him an exit route when he needed one. A couch in Portland when our father's pressure became unmanageable for a few days, a phone available at any hour, a person who would not report back. I had kept his confidence on a dozen smaller things over the years. The times he had doubted the brokerage, the girlfriend at 24 our father would have disapproved of, the weekend trip he took at 27 that he told our parents was for work. I had been his counterweight for 15 years and had not known I was also being his cover. I thought about all of this while I drove to Sacramento for the first time in 8 months, on a Sunday in mid-November, because my father had called to say he wanted to discuss the handling of Mateo's remaining assets. Specifically, a small life insurance payout that had been in a holding state for 3 years while the estate was finalized, and he wanted me present. I did not tell him anything on the phone. I said I would come. I put Emilio's laminated photograph in the inside pocket of my coat before I left. My parents' house in Sacramento was the same house we had grown up in. My father had paid it off when I was 16 and had never seen a reason to move. It was a clean, well-maintained house on a street of similar houses, with a driveway that Mateo and I had learned to ride bikes on and a kitchen table that had hosted 30 years of decisions that were not really discussions. I arrived on a Sunday afternoon in November, the light already low by 4 o'clock, the hills to the east that particular dry gold they turned in autumn. My mother met me at the door. She was quieter than she used to be, my mother. She had been quieter every time I visited since Mateo died. She hugged me in the doorway and held on a little longer than usual and didn't say much, and I understood this as its own kind of communication. My father came out of his study after a few minutes. Not immediately, because he rarely did things immediately. He timed his entrances to establish that the room reorganized around him. He looked the same as he always did, compact, well-pressed, reading glasses pushed up on his head. "Valentina," he said. He kissed my cheek. "Good drive." "Fine," I said. "Some traffic on 205. "Sit down," he said. "Your mother made dinner." We ate. My father spoke about the brokerage, about a new client, about a regulatory change he found frustrating. My mother passed things across the table and offered seconds and maintained the steady, practiced performance of a normal Sunday dinner that I recognized as something she had been mounting for 30 years. I ate and responded at appropriate intervals and kept my coat on the chair beside me. After dinner, my father settled into his chair in the living room with a cup of coffee and said, without preamble, that he wanted to talk about the Mateo situation. "The insurance payout is going to finalize," he said. "After 3 years of the estate sitting open, the attorney says we can close it now. The payout goes to the estate, which means it goes through me as executor." He paused. "It's not a large amount. $90,000. But it should be handled correctly." I said nothing. I set my coffee cup down on the table. "I want to establish a small fund in Mateo's name," my father continued. "At the brokerage, actually, we would manage it ourselves, invest it appropriately, and use it for the family going forward. A memorial fund of sorts. It seems like the right thing." I looked at him. "The family going forward," I said. "Your mother and I and you," he said. "The 3 of us. That's who's left." My mother was looking at her coffee cup. She did not look up. I felt something tighten in my sternum. Not pain, exactly, but a kind of pressure, like the moment before a weather system breaks. "And that's everything?" I said. "The full estate. $90,000 and the personal effects." "That's everything," my father said. He met my eyes with the patient, steady look I had known my entire life. "Unless you know something different." He said it the way someone says something they are certain the other person does not know. I reached over to my coat on the chair beside me and smoothed the fabric over the inner pocket where the photograph was. I did not take it out. I just pressed my hand against it once, briefly, through the wool, and then folded my hands in my lap and looked at my father. "I don't think we should rush the decision about the fund," I said. "Give me a few weeks to think about it." My father studied me for a moment. He noticed that something had shifted. I could see him noticing. But he did not know what it was. "All right," he said. "A few weeks." I stayed for one more hour. I helped my mother with the dishes. I said goodbye to my father at the door. I drove back to Portland through the dark with the photograph in my pocket and Graciella's number in my phone, and I thought about a 4-year-old boy who had carried a laminated picture of his father for his entire conscious life, waiting for an aunt he had never met, and about a 63-year-old woman who had shopped at a grocery store twice a week for 6 months so that the meeting could happen the way Mateo had once said he hoped it would. I thought about $90,000 described as everything. I thought about what everything meant and what it didn't. By the time I crossed back into Oregon, I had made a decision. Not about the fund. About what came next. I called Graciella the morning before I went back to Sacramento. I told her what my father had said about the estate, the $90,000, the fund, the word everything. I told her about the separate savings account Mateo had set up, the $22,000 that had run out before Pilar died. I told her I wanted to understand, before I walked back into that house, whether Mateo had put anything in writing. Anything with Emilio's name on it. Anything that could be documented. Graciella was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Come over before you go." I went to her apartment that Thursday morning. It was a small, clean apartment in Northeast Portland, the kind of place where every surface is used carefully because there is not much surface to spare. Emilio was at preschool. Graciella made coffee and set a cardboard box on the kitchen table. Inside the box was everything Mateo had left with her to keep. Not much, and also everything. A folder of printed emails between him and Pilar, dates going back 6 years, the earliest ones from when they had first started seeing each other. A handwritten letter addressed to Emilio, sealed, with "For when you're older" written on the front in Mateo's handwriting. A second folder containing a single document, a paternity acknowledgement, signed by Mateo, notarized, dated 4 years ago, 5 months before his death. Emilio Mateo Fuentes Cruz. Father, Mateo Rodrigo Cruz. And beneath that, a copy of a letter Mateo had written and apparently never sent, addressed to our father. I could tell it was never sent because the envelope was still in the box, unsealed, with the letter folded inside. I did not read the letter that morning. I asked Graciella if I could take a copy of the paternity acknowledgement. She said she already had it. She handed me a copy she had made weeks before. When she had begun, she said, to think that the conversation with my father was coming whether anyone was ready for it or not. I drove to Sacramento that afternoon with the copy in my bag and Emilio's photograph in my coat, and something settled in the center of my chest that I recognized, from a long time ago, as the feeling of having enough. My father had called the meeting for Saturday morning. When I arrived, he was already at the kitchen table with his reading glasses on and a folder of his own in front of him. The estate documents, I assumed. My mother was making coffee. She set a cup in front of me and then sat down at the far end of the table, the position she always took in these conversations, which was as far toward the perimeter as the room allowed. I looked at the timeline again. My father said, by way of opening, "The attorney confirms we can close the estate in the next 30 days. I'd like to move forward." I set my bag on the floor beside my chair. I did not open it yet. "Before we do that," I said, "I want to ask you something." He looked at me over his glasses. "Go ahead. Did Mateo ever tell you about anyone he was close to in Portland? In the last few years before he died?" My father's expression did not change. He had friends there. He mentioned a few people from the conference circuit. "Why?" "Not friends," I said. "Someone specific." He set his pen down on the folder. "Valentina, what is this about?" I reached into my bag. I did not rush it. I found the document, brought it out, and set it on the table in front of him. 1 page. The notary seal was visible in the bottom corner. Mateo had a son, I said. His name is Emilio. He's 4 years old. He lives in Portland. The kitchen was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when something irreversible has just entered them. My father looked at the document. He picked it up. He read it. I watched his eyes move across the page once and then again. My mother had turned from the counter and was standing very still. "This is a paternity acknowledgement," my father said. His voice was level. That register, level, deliberate, the patience that felt like contempt. I had known it my whole life. "Where did you get this?" "From Emilio's grandmother," I said. "Her name is Graciela Fuentes. Her daughter was Pilar. Pilar died 14 months ago. Emilio has been with Graciela since then." My father set the document down. He folded his hands on top of it. "And you've known about this how long?" He said. 6 weeks, I said. 6 weeks. He repeated it without inflection. "And you waited to tell me." I squared the edge of my bag against the chair leg before I answered him. "I needed to understand what I was looking at," I said. "What you were looking at," he said, "is a claim from someone we don't know against an estate that is in the process of closing." He paused. "Mateo would have told us. If there had been a child, he would have told us." "He didn't tell us," I said. "That was the point." My father looked at me. "I don't know what you mean by that." "Yes, you do," I said. A silence opened between us. For seconds, maybe 5. My mother made a small sound at the counter. Not words, just a breath, and then was quiet again. "Mateo kept this from us," my father said, "because he was not certain about the situation. That is the most reasonable explanation. A child who may or may not be." "The paternity acknowledgement is notarized," I said. "Mateo signed it. He knew. Then he should have told us." His voice tightened by 1 degree. He had obligations to this family. He had a role here. If he had a son, that son deserved to be known, and Mateo should have. "He was afraid of what you would do," I said. The sentence landed. My father stopped. I did not look away. "He was afraid," I said, "that if he told you, you would find a way to make it something it wasn't. He had built a life in Portland that was his own, and he wanted it to stay that way. He wanted to tell you eventually. He ran out of time." My father took off his reading glasses and set them on the table. He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. When he lowered his hand, he looked older than he had 60 seconds before, which was the only sign I had that anything I'd said had reached him. "This changes the estate," he said. "Yes," I said. "It does." He moved from denial to procedure in less than 10 minutes. By the time my mother had sat down at the table, my father was already calculating the legal implications, the documentation requirements, the question of whether the paternity acknowledgement was sufficient or whether a DNA test would be required, and if so, how that would be arranged and through whom. He did not shout. He did not express grief for the fact of Emilio's existence or for the years his grandson had been unknown to him. He reorganized it into logistics. My mother cried. Quietly, at the end of the table, with a folded napkin pressed against her mouth. She cried for Mateo and for Pilar and for a little boy she had never met, and my father let her cry without looking at her, which had always been the arrangement. At some point, in the middle of my father describing the process for amending the estate, I said, "I want to talk about Graciela's situation." He stopped. "Meaning what?" "Meaning she is 63 years old and she is raising a 4-year-old alone," I said. "The savings account Mateo set up is gone. The $90,000 in the estate, that belongs to Emilio. Not to a memorial fund at the brokerage." My father looked at me. "That determination will need to go through the attorney." "I know," I said. "And it will. But I want you to understand before it does what I'm going to say when I'm asked." He studied me for a moment. I looked at him steadily. You told me 3 weeks ago that we were 3 people, I said. You, Mom, and me. That's who's left. You said it like it was a complete sentence. But you had already made Mateo's life into the kind of place where a child couldn't exist inside it openly, and so the child existed outside it, and now you're the last person to know. I paused. You used to tell Mateo that a man who can't manage his own affairs can't be trusted with anything larger. You told me that drawing was a hobby, not a direction. You told us both, in about 100 different ways over about 30 years, that belonging here had conditions. I paused again. The whole time you were telling Mateo that he was in Portland building something real. He was someone's father. He was good at it by every account I have. He did it entirely without your input, and it turns out that was exactly the point. My father said nothing for a long moment. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, I said. I'm telling you because Emilio is going to know his grandfather, and I need you to understand, before that happens, that the way you ran things before is not the way this goes. My mother reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She left it there. My father put his reading glasses back on and looked at the document on the table. Not at me. At the page. At Mateo's signature above the notary seal. He said, very quietly, "He should have come to me." "Maybe," I said. "But he didn't. And I think we both know why." I picked up my coffee cup, found it cold, and set it back down. I did not say anything else. The room sat with it, and after a while my father got up and went back to his study, and my mother and I sat at the table together until the afternoon light shifted, and she asked if I wanted more coffee, and I said yes, and she got up to make it, and that was how it ended. Not with a door slamming, not with a pronouncement, but with the ordinary sounds of a kitchen and 2 women sitting together in the quiet that comes after something true has finally been said. Emilio met my parents 6 weeks later. My mother cried again, more openly this time, and crouched down to his level in Graciella's living room and said his name, and Emilio looked at her with those eyes, Mateo's eyes, our mother's eyes, and offered her a small plastic dinosaur he had brought because he had decided it was a good gift. My father shook Graciella's hand and thanked her for raising Emilio and did not say much else, and Graciella received it with a dignity that was, I thought, considerably more than he deserved. The estate closed 3 months after that. Emilio's portion, as Mateo's legal heir, was adjudicated through the attorney and placed in a protected account until he turns 25. The fund my father had proposed at the brokerage was not created. Nobody discussed it again. I drive to Portland twice a month now to have dinner with Graciella and Emilio. On alternating Saturdays, Emilio sleeps over at my apartment, and we make pancakes in the morning, which he approaches with the same careful seriousness he applies to book selection and dinosaur taxonomy. He calls me Aunt Lena, which is what his father taught him to call me, and every time he says it I feel something that does not have a clean name. Grief and gratitude braided together so tightly I have stopped trying to separate them. I think about Mateo a lot, still. About what it cost him to keep that secret. About whether he made the right call, or whether there was a version of things where he came to me and I helped him figure out how to tell our father, and it went better than he feared. I don't know. I'll never know. But I know what he gave me by leaving Emilio in the world, the chance to keep something of him that our father's version of the family would have tried to reorganize into something smaller and more controlled. There is something I have come to understand about the people who love you through conditions. They are not wrong that conditions exist. The world runs on requirements, on accountability, on the plain fact that some things cannot be sustained without structure. But there is a kind of structure that holds people together and a kind of structure that holds them in place, and the difference is whether anyone inside it is allowed to grow in a direction that was not pre-approved. Mateo grew. He grew in secret, in a separate city without permission. He left behind a 4-year-old boy with dark eyes and a plastic dinosaur and a photograph he had carried his whole life. I think that counts as getting it right. Even if it was harder than it needed to be. Even if he did it scared. If this story made you think of someone you've lost, or something you found out too late, share it with a person who might need to hear it today. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. Names, characters, and events are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real persons or situations is coincidental.